We are in fact now live. This is our European Ask Me Anything. Me and Tiago here. Fortunately, we couldn't get anyone else. Nathan is currently lying in a ditch somewhere. I'm not entirely sure where. I've done that thing where I've got my stream playing at the background, so it's now doubling up, and I'm very confused. Tiago, how are you?
Hello. Okay. I'm good. I've calmed down. I don't know about you, but I have.
You were very excited about that.
I was excited about Tottenham going through, yeah. And you were supposed to be excited as well, as you said you were rooting for Tottenham, but I guess you're not anymore
Well, we seem to have lost Tiago. Tiago, where have you gone?
What? I'm here.
Oh, yeah. What were you saying? I was supposed to be what? Excited?
I'm saying that you were supposed to be excited as well, as you said you were going to root for Tottenham.
Did I?
No.
Yeah,
before the game you said, no, I'm rooting for Tottenham as well.
Well, I'm rooting for the people who I care about, who support Tottenham. But
that's fair enough. But you just halfway through the game, you just kind of decided that you were supporting Ajax, I feel, because then by the end, I was excited and you were just like, oh, piss off or whatever. So
no, my feeling was very much that a Liverpool Ajax final would be more interesting than watching Liverpool and Spurs play again.
But you just remember that when the final was coming to an end, I think, because before the game you said,
well, because it was never in danger, really, was it? It was never in danger before. It was always like Ajax were always going through when they were 2-0 up. It was like, oh, that's that. And then it became more and more real as the game went on, and then I was like, I
told you to believe. You didn't believe me.
Anyway, we should welcome everyone to this chat. There is a chat bar at the side of the YouTube page that you're on. If you have any questions, please throw them in there, because otherwise it's just going to be Tiago and I chatting rubbish. So do put your questions in there. Let's talk about the Spurs game first, though, because obviously it's raw in our minds, fresh. Yeah, exactly. So we've had 10 minutes to calm down. What are your thoughts on the way that the game progressed? Were you surprised in the end that Spurs came down from that 2-goal deficit, which was a 3-goal deficit on aggregate?
I mean, not really. Like, the second half is kind of, as I said, the second half is pretty like in favor of Spurs. Like, I think of the Ziyech shot that went against the poster that could have been the 3-0, the 3-1. I don't even know at that point, but like could have killed the game off. But like, I still think that for the most part, the second half was mostly Tottenham chances, and Llorente really was useful. I was telling you this like throughout the game, because Llorente came in and Tottenham just kind of resorted to long balling it to Llorente up top, and that's kind of rudimental, but it was working.
And it worked. It worked for the goal, right?
Yeah, and it just worked like pretty much since he came in. He came in at the start of the second half, so he pretty much worked through the entirety of the second half. So that was nice. I think we were all a bit overexcited watching the game, as we were watching the game together with Nico Morales as well, and was anyone else with us? Oh, and Bobby Gardner. So I think we all got a bit over enthusiastic, and I can only think of Tottenham oofing long balls up to Llorente right now. If you can give me your input.
Yeah, no, same here. It was quite an emotional game, I think. But maybe a good topic of conversation would be where we sort of ended up in the chat, which was you came out with the quote that you think Pochettino is the GOAT. I know that you were saying that in terms of his capacity to get
it's not necessarily related to today's approach.
Yeah, it's a very meat and potato Spurs team to the final of the Champions League. So, but let's talk a little bit about Pochettino, because obviously you think that he's a brilliant manager, so it might be a good place to go there.
Sure, especially since we apparently don't agree, which is weird. Because
you called him the greatest of all time. I was only disagreeing with that.
I didn't call him that. I said he's the greatest manager in the world.
You said GOAT, but maybe that's just
Nico said GOAT. Nico said GOAT. Okay. So, resolve your situation with Nico. I didn't call him the greatest of all time. I said he's the best manager in the world, and I think he is. And I thought he was before the game, and I was going to think the same thing after the game, regardless of the result. But just the fact that he got this Tottenham team to a Champions League final is pretty pretty crazy to me. That's all. Nico kind of took it to another level. I was actually pretty surprised that Nico even agreed with me, and then he just kind of took it to another level, and he said it was the best of all time. So maybe Nico's the one that needs to relax a little bit.
Nico's thinking of pitching. I think that's what it is. You've got to think in those sorts of sweeping terms to start pitching things to people.
Sure, but I do think he's the best manager in the world. I think.
Really? You think he's better than Klopp? E.g.
Yeah, I think he's the best manager in the world. Do you want to compare like the resources they've had to work with?
Yeah, but I think I know these conversations always become boring, right? Because they then come down to definitional arguments about what you mean by the greatest. In terms of tactically, I guess you could say that you'd probably think there would be managers who are probably better than him tactically, but then obviously football management isn't simply about tactics; it's about man management as well.
Yeah, so it's about a combination of factors. So but having in account like the stint that Poch has had at Tottenham. I think he's probably the longest standing manager in the Premier League now, isn't he? I think
he's up there.
I think it's him and Dyche. I think
Dyche, I think, is probably the longest one, but
but like regardless, just the entire tenure there that he's had, the players that he's turned over, in terms of like just players exiting and players coming up and players that he turned into much better players than they were before, while always keeping a very, very high level of like tactical discipline. It's really, really impressive because like Klopp is a bit like that as well, in the sense of having that relationship with the players and that man management, as well as being tactically very good. But there's not many managers that combine both of those factors. And sure, you can put those two in the same box or whatever. It does. My point is just like it's impressive that you have both of those sets of characteristics within the same manager, and it's just like sure, at this point it'd probably be fun to. I'm not sure if it'd be more fun to see Pochettino be given extra resources within this Tottenham project, or to see Pochettino take over another project. But regardless, I think like what he's done here, it's pretty damn impressive.
What do you think that Pochettino would do if he were given resources? Do you think he would lose an edge there? Because obviously, what we're talking about here is his capacity to go to clubs like Espanyol, Southampton, take what they've got and make something of it. It's very Bielsan in that sense.
Yeah, but I think we've talked about this with Nathan before, and it's like, I'm not quite sure how much of an hand in transfers does Pochettino have at Tottenham, and I don't think any of us really know, and that'd be quite important in terms of like, I don't know, like he hasn't had a transfer in for a little bit now, for like a year and a half now or whatever, so that's beyond the point. But like before then, the players that were coming in and that you would end up molding and stuff, it'd just be really interesting to know if those players were coming in out of his like own volition, or if they were players that were coming in through like scouting staff and director boards or whatever, or agents or whatever else, and Pochettino then just accepts them and ends up like shaping them to what he wants them to be, because that really would help us like kind of not really classify him, but like help us figure out just how good he is on that sense as well, and what you would do with extra resources, because you don't know if by extra resources do you mean like, are Tottenham going to go out and purchase like the center midfielder that they need and the fullbacks that they need and arguably the goalkeeper that they need, or are you going to like offer that, like how much of an end on that does Pochettino have, and if he has like, if he's in major control of that, then we have an extra layer to judge him upon, and if not, and if he's just taking in players that he kind of sort of approves and he's fine with, but not necessarily players that he's the one that pursued, then that gives him even more merit to what's been done, because the players that have come in, they've pretty much all improved, barring, well, to be fair, Nkudu and a couple of others, not really, but like you get the point. Like a lot of the players have improved and have turned into much better players than they were before. And it'd just be interesting to figure out if those players are coming out of Pochettino as well, or I don't know. I don't know how transfers are done.
Let me clarify my position, because one of the things that, and I see Abel in the group, in the chat, has mentioned, laughed at about the fact that I mentioned Bielsa. But when I'm talking about Bielsa, one of the things that I talk about is the.
Did you mention Bielsa already?
Yeah, I did. Sorry, I said it was Bielsen. So this idea of developing players and sort of making the sum of the parts better than the whole, and that's a conversation I think we could have with Pochettino. Obviously, there's the influence there, and it will be interesting to have that conversation. But one of the things I talk about when I talk about Bielsa is this notion of the Goldilocks effect, which for Bielsa, I always wonder whether or not, he doesn't ever manage really elite teams, barring the Argentinian national side. But this idea that he needs a certain level of player to be able to have his team play the way that he wants to play, to be able to be fit enough to be able to play the way that he wants to play. But I get the feeling as well, if you have a team of players who are really elite, he might struggle to actually get them to sign up for that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
The ideas and just sign in and just be fine with doing all that running and all that.
How would you feel about that then, comparing that to Pochettino? Like, do you think Pochettino is the same sort of player?
I think it's kind of like, I think it's not as aggressive. It's perhaps more of a middle term of just like, I think Bielsa is in a super extreme position when it comes to like applying his system. And that's often what ends up screwing him over. And we've seen that time and time again. And like players just get destroyed more than physically. They get like completely mentally off if they even buy into the system. Like, I think Pochettino, especially since Pochettino has adapted is Jesus. I'm opening up the chat, so I
keep going. It's all right.
But especially since Pochettino, like, he has adapted the system throughout, and he has done things differently. And even like throughout, like even within the same season, like throughout this season, they've played differently through patches. Last season, especially, they went a little bit more counterattacking for a good portion. And like that, I think it's more of just like him having a good relationship with players and then them just buying into kind of whatever, them buying into like his leadership and however he wants to approach matches, a bit like Klopp, and less like Bielsa in terms of like buying a single philosophy and like a single approach to almost every game, because like Bielsa doesn't adapt as much, I don't think.
Yeah, no, I would totally agree with that, and I suppose Pochettino feels a little bit more like a bit more pragmatic Bielsa in that regard.
I mean, anyone is more.
Well, yeah, that is true. He is the ultimate idealist. Shabab Hussain asks, with all the teams dropping big leads in the Champions League, is it just a coincidence or a deeper meaning? Are teams just worse at defending? What do you reckon? Why are we?
I thought this was gonna be an argument towards like in favor of the mentality and of the like Klopp having it, and I think there's a portion to that. I was gonna say like it's just obviously unquantifiable, but like seeing teams like
Manchester City.
No, seeing teams like Liverpool and Tottenham and even Ajax before with Juventus coming back from disadvantageous positions, this like there is obviously a big mental contribution, the big like you look at those teams and they'll have managers who have like really good relationships with players, really good like man management per se, kind of. I just assume that Den Haag is in that position as well, even though I don't know him as well. And I think there's a portion to that. But it sucks because it's unquantifiable, and we will just have to say that it's like, oh yeah, I'm sure that plays a part, and it does, but you can never figure out just how much of it that is.
Yeah, I think for me the interesting fact is, and we've said this before, haven't we? We've always talked about how football is becoming more and more about process. It's becoming more about maximizing your chances, and when you do that, obviously in a league scenario, you're going to see more often than not that's going to be followed through more often. So there's no surprises that we're seeing Manchester City be the team to beat in the Premier League, but then we've always had this scenario where the Champions League is very much just it's a knockout tournament, and anything can happen over two legs. And I suppose the question then becomes,
ends up playing a bigger role, I think. And like
and
then you see teams like PSG that tend to have, like, as we've seen in the past month, they have a much more divided locker room, and teams of that nature, and teams that are a lot more based on like individual superstar quality, Real Madrid-esque, that don't really have a manager that's cohesive with the ideals of every player and stuff like that. Those teams tend to end up falling to these kinds of teams that are unified, that have a natural process, and that have a natural interpersonal relationship between each player and the manager and stuff, and they have a much stronger group mentally. But I think what I'm saying makes sense, and I think most people will agree. But then it's just about, some people will say that it matters more, some people will say that it matters a little bit less, and you can never prove anyone right or wrong. So you just kind of, it has an impact, and it does.
I guess I'm kind of thinking
being unquantifiable sucks.
In terms of the Eredivisie, you would have thought that Ajax, the way that they played in the Champions League, would have run away with the league, but they are level on points with Eindhoven.
Well, there's probably a lot of PSV. I haven't watched PSV that much this season, but like, there's probably a lot of PSV merit there, and not necessarily Ajax not being good enough per se. And I just think it's more.
But then if you look at, say, for example, and then throw Tottenham into the mix, Tottenham have been very poor in the Premier League by their recent standards. So again, that sort of throws that question out there as well.
They started the game today, and they were 2-0 down at halftime. So I think that was like matching up well to their recent performance standard. I'm not like. What happened at halftime? I don't know. Like, I would love to hear what Poch said at halftime today, or whatever.
Yeah.
But again, you can never like quantify the impact of that. Like, you can quantify the impact of, Llorente came in and he did really well because he let them exit pressure a lot better. They can just lump it forward. It seems kind of basic, but it's true. Ajax pressure was really, really good and really organized and pretty much relentless. And Tottenham was having a little bit of trouble leaving their own half, especially with Lloris and their fullbacks, Trippier. So that just kind of gives them an easy route forward, and then you have like two more mobile forwards around them, and that tends to create chances. And it did, but like, I very much doubt that that's everything that Poch said. That's not right. So he would have made other adjustments, and he must have had a major impact, like, mentally, but you just don't know.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, my question is well, I'm trying to approach the question when you ask why is the Champions League different this time round? It just, for me, it's too small a sample size to just simply make huge sweeping statements such as, teams are just worse at defending, or X, Y, or Z has happened.
Yeah, it's just like, especially because it's another competition, like, kind of everything can happen. It's just 2 matches, and like, it's basically what you said. Like, in a league competition, consistency wins you games, and like, big teams tend to be able to put in results a lot more consistently throughout a 36 match season, or 34, or whatever. In the Champions League, the mental aspect comes along. There's the randomness aspect coming along, and it's just a mixture of factors that leads to this sometimes. And every Champions League season, and Europa League as well, but the difference between teams there is different. But like, every Champions League season, there's 1 or 2 or 3 major upsets in the knockouts, and this season we just happen to have quite a couple more. Like, it's not necessarily a sign of anything. I mean, it would if it kept happening for the next like 5 Champions League seasons.
But no one's doubting the fact that teams are playing more openly this time round for some reason. I mean, that's got a lot to do with the teams that are still in it, right? I
think it's more so Ajax. Who else are you talking about?
Well, I guess no one's thinking of. I guess no one's thinking of the elephant in the room is Jose Mourinho, right? That's what everyone's thinking.
I mean, you have a pretty good example to fortify your point, which is like the way Valencia played away at Arsenal last week. They went away to Arsenal in hopes of like bringing a result back, like a point or whatever, and they started with like 6 defenders.
Yeah.
And they were awful, and they lost, and they like could have the match could have ended right there, and they got an away goal, but they were lucky with a set piece, and they probably would have been much better just approaching the game as they normally do, instead of adapting to a much more defensive, deep defensive lines type of scheme, which is what they did. So I suppose that's a point in your favor. But beyond that, I think it's just more like Ajax being Ajax and having this situation this season where they have the combination of a bunch of really good talent staying, a good manager, everything's super cohesive, and they're playing their style and all that stuff. Because beyond that, which other underdog are you seeing playing in a very offensive, aggressive manner? You don't. Like in the quarterfinals, the only other underdogs that were in were Porto. They didn't play in possession, nor they didn't even press the die in the Champions League. Manchester United, they went through to the quarterfinals playing awful football.
Yeah.
Who else? Yeah, I think it's just more.
I'm not making the argument. I'm not making the argument that underdogs are playing defensive football there, and they've dropped out earlier. Not in the slightest, but I think there is a question to be asked about whether or not. I mean, as Shabab is saying, why is it that teams have been worse at holding leads? We've seen that happen a few times in the knockout fixtures in this Champions League, and there's clearly been luck involved. A huge. It seems like luck anyway. A huge amount. Like you said yourself to me earlier, the fact that Liverpool could overturn a 3-0 deficit is you can't just simply put that down to Klopp's tactical brilliance. That comes down to levels of luck as well, and there's a sense in which that's the same.
Could have gone the other way around, because like Liverpool were pretty dominant away in Spain, and they ended up with a 3-0 deficit.
Yeah,
because Messi, and they could have perfectly left Catalonia with like a 1-goal lead or with a goal-scoring draw or something like that, which were a lot more probable results, having into account the chances that occurred in the match. And it's not what happened. They came back with a 3-0 deficit, and then at home, after they scored the first goal, Barca could have scored 1, 2, 3 goals or something, and Alisson had like 4 or 5 really good saves from pretty much point blank. That could have basically ended the situation. He saved them, and then they ended up getting the result. So I think luck in that one was kind of balanced, and Liverpool ended up going through, and perhaps they ended up getting their luck in the second leg, but overall they were the better team. So I think that's somewhat fine. I think the Tottenham one is a little bit more balanced. I'm not sure. It's just talking about luck is always a bit.
So yeah, no, of course, it's arbitrary and unquantifiable, etc., etc. But maybe one of the things I always think is asking counterfactual questions, like what conversation would we be having tonight if Spurs hadn't have grabbed that goal at the end? What would the conversation have been about? We would obviously have talked about Ajax a lot more, but how do you think we would have then responded to Spurs? Because I don't think we would be quite so positive, and I think that's partly why I reacted to the Pochettino being the greatest manager of all time, because it does just come down to the ball bounces off.
I did not say that. I really didn't. It was Nico. You can read the tweet. I didn't say that, but I agree. I was just the reason why I got so excited about Tottenham going through is because I didn't expect them to go through.
Yeah.
Right. I think it's not like I'm celebrating a tactical masterclass. I'm celebrating a last-minute lucky winner or whatever, for a team that I appreciate a lot. For a team that I wanted to go through, right? And for a manager that I wanted to go through. And if that didn't happen, first and foremost, we'd still be praising Ajax attacking football like we're doing right now, so that wouldn't change. And for Tottenham, because I mean, I don't think Ajax dropping back would have been the solution, and they could have got 1, 2 more goals with the situation that they had. So there's nothing for us to complain there. And for Tottenham, them getting 2 goals back and then not getting the third, I mean, we'd look at that team and be like, yeah, that's fine. That's fair enough. It happens or whatever. Right? I don't think our conversation would change that much. I think our conversation would change a lot more if Divock Origi didn't score the 4th yesterday and they went to penalties and Barca won in penalties.
Yeah.
And that would be a whole thing about how Liverpool was superior, when comparing both legs and stuff like that. And then the conversation that we're having here about like, oh, Liverpool got unlucky in the first leg, but then got lucky in the second leg. It's all good because they deserved it. That conversation would have been a lot more frustrating to Liverpool fans who would have just been like, oh, Barca got so lucky to go through. And I don't think tactical points would have come up as much, perhaps. I don't know. I don't think there's many tactical points about this Barca anyway, other than being really, really, really awful in defensive transition. Like, they really are. They're so bad. And
why do you think that is? Like, let's move on to talk about that game and those two fixtures, and then move on to talk about the final and what we expect to see.
I kind of feel like going over just Barca defensive transitions from this season. I think I might do that like tomorrow night or Friday or something like that. Because I just think it's so interesting how bad they are. Like, they're remarkably bad at defending transitions. It's like often like the personnel choices in midfield doesn't help. I think Busquets is having perhaps a slightly underwhelming season, or at least the end of the season. I didn't really follow like the entire season super closely, so I can't tell you how good he was till a couple months ago, but like he's perhaps tailing off a little bit now. I don't know if age is coming along. I don't know if he's just tired or whatever. And then they're just really, really, really bad counter pressers. They're not organized at all in that part of their game. And it ends up just being a mess. And there's the situation of Barca's three forwards pretty much not defending.
Yeah.
And that's bad. Like, for those at home that need some sort of explanation on that, like, that's really bad. Messi, of course, could theoretically get a pass, and like even in the Liga games, you should be fine with Coutinho, Suarez, and Messi staying up front, or Coutinho, Messi, and Ousmane Dembele staying up front, regardless of the situations, or not tracking back as aggressively, or not counter pressing as they should, or whatever, because they're La Liga games, especially this season where they won the title like ages ago because none of the other opponents were competitive enough.
Yeah.
But like in matches like these, forget about it. Like, because they don't change in matches like this. They still counter press poorly. Their attackers still have a lot of trouble tracking back, and it's just, look at their midfield, and it's what yesterday was it Rakitic, Vidal, and Busquets.
Coutinho as well, but I guess
he
drops and pushes forward.
Yeah, so then you look at that midfield, and it's like Vidal was quite decent yesterday, actually. A lot of people criticize him. He was decent. But like, regardless, it's not necessarily the combined skill set that you'd want to deal with defensive transitions. And Busquets is like, I don't think he's done. Like, I've read some comments saying like Busquets is done or whatever. Like, Busquets, he's not even that old. I think he's like 31. Like, he's younger than you. He's fine. But like, he perhaps must have lost a step, or like he's just having a couple of poor games or whatever, and the team really reflects on that because you don't really counter press well as a unit, and you're just screwed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess my question to that would be, if we're going down the Barcelona route, is I'm always interested to. Obviously, Messi is still at an incredible level. We saw that in the first leg. But
there's
obviously,
a lot of Barca players that playing at still a very
yeah, of course. I guess when you build your team around a player like Messi, or you fit your team around certain players, you've mentioned Busquets as well, who was hugely important for Barca for years and years for the way that they played. And I just kind of wonder, I know that Valverde's come in and he's changed things up, and there's been that question, how can he come in and switch up Barca from the way that they've played traditionally to this? But it does still feel like a team that is in between greatness, right? And I suppose I wonder how much
super reliant on individuals. I think I don't know, because I don't know what. Firstly, I don't watch Barca enough. It's just not a team that I follow with enough regularity to be. Sorry, I was reading the comments. It's just not a team that I follow with enough regularity for me to give all sorts of like final comments on. But like, I don't know what Valverde's theoretical ideal system is. I don't know like what he's trying to achieve in terms of like long term. I don't see the team progressing towards it. I think I especially think that in transition they're really, really poor, and I don't think that's like if he hasn't fixed it yet, I don't think he's gonna fix it in general. But I also don't think you can just bring. I don't think you can bring a like this super high pressing manager to Barca and expect with these players to get anywhere. There can be issues of like man management as well. I don't think you have the relationship between Barca players and their manager like Liverpool has or Barca used to have, like with Pep or even with Tito or whatever. And yeah, so like there's a bunch of situations in which they're still super individual reliant, and I don't know if that's like I don't know if that's just what we see, and they're trying to progress somewhere that we can't see yet. But right now, results seem pretty poor. Like you're talking about Messi still doing really, really well. Like PK has been awesome. Like even throughout these two legs, like really good. And I think we kind of we understate how good PK is. It's truly incredible how much better of a player he is to me compared to Sergio Ramos, and they've played together for so many years. But I just feel like he's been somewhat on the radar over the last few years. But I don't feel like he's done. I don't feel like Busquets is necessarily like gone, even though someone like Frankie de Jong will be a big help next season. Even Alba has been very good every time I watch them. Even throughout the Champions League, he's been really, really good. So even these older players, they're still seemingly in a pretty decent position. So
yeah, no, I do agree with you.
I'm not quite sure what they're processing. Do you know until when does Valverde have a deal with him?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I guess this is his end of his second year, isn't it? So I guess he's probably got a 3-year deal. But I don't know what the I don't follow La Liga closely enough to know the ins and outs of these things. But it does feel as though he has been an interim manager, which is kind of weird, right? Considering he's been relatively successfs,ful, all things considered.
I think you get to a point where you just kind of look at what's happening. He has a deal until 2020, so he has a year left. You just kind of look at what's happening with their opposition for the league title, at least, and for the domestic competitions, and you see that the competition is just a level below, regardless of like Real Madrid has been a mess. Athletic has finally been on the down low with Simeone, or at least has been decreasing in quality slowly. And the other teams can't step up. So it's just like it's always tough not to give credit to the manager, and I'm sure there is some, but you can't help but feel like it's underwhelming, regardless of like the amount of trophies they got and the amount of wins they got and all of that. Because if you watch their games, you know that team is super flawed, and you know that team, once they get caught on in certain situations against teams that have players that are just as good, you know they're going to play. And they did against Liverpool, and they would have played in Spain as well. They could have easily lost that game at home, and they didn't, because Messi and because randomness of the situation. That happens. That's okay. But like, you see throughout the season, and you see these moments against certain other teams that are perhaps just a level below and perhaps can't take advantage of the flaws that Barca do have. Like their game against Sevilla, away to Sevilla, that ended up 4-4, I think. The one where Messi scores the 4 or scores 3 or what have you.
Yeah.
They were awful. They're really bad without the ball. And every time they lose the ball, it's just a mess.
Yeah.
And and Sevilla scored a bunch of times, and Messi's a thing. And you can't help but feel like it's underwhelming for a Barca result, for a Barca manager to play this way. And you gotta end up judging it by how they play and less so by the trophies that they get, because that's really context dependent, and the context that they've been on is a context that's pretty much mandatory for them to win trophies. And I don't think that's as shitty as it is for you to be like, oh, you haven't been good enough, even though you won pretty much everything. I still think that's the right way to go, because the team just is too flawed for a 2-year tenure, I think.
Yeah. And I guess the thing that we've talked about here is, one, obviously Barca rely on individuals, and I think this is linked to the second thing that we've mentioned. When you rely on individuals, you then are going to struggle generally in transition, because playing well in transition is about being able to move well as a team, to be structured well as a team, and individuals tend not to fit into that dynamic. So a question here from Asia Hali. Do keep your questions coming in, by the way, about Vidal playing ahead of Artur. How do you feel about that, given that
I don't even think it was bad at Anfield. I think it kind of didn't make too much sense to me at home to Liverpool, when I expected them to want more of the ball and to want to have more control.
Yeah.
Then at that point I expected Arthur, and I said that, right? Vidal does offer a bit more control of their defensive transition compared to Artur. And I think that's kind of what they went for in both games. And I think Arthur ended up being pretty decent in the second game. And in the second game, he ended up making sense. His selection ended up making sense. Yeah. The first game, I don't think the selection made as much sense to me initially. And I don't think he ends up having as good of a game. He kind of makes up for it in the second game. I saw a lot of people complaining about Arthur. And about Vidal, I mean. That's mostly because Vidal is kind of the embodiment of what they didn't expect to see at Barca. He's kind of the embodiment of a systemic change, per se, because he's the type of player that would never have gotten minutes under a different managerial regimen, and he now has. But I think that's somewhat unfair. I don't have any issue with like Barca switching up styles, or perhaps like even straying away from what was once considered the Barcelona style of play. But you still need to make it work. Like, even if especially so if you're switching the approach of previous managers.
Yeah.
You do need to be less flawed, and even in possession is a particularly like individual reliant side, I feel.
Mohamed Abdel Wahab Osman Mohamed brings up De Jong, because obviously De Jong is going to Barcelona. How do you see him fitting in?
I just said that. I think not just like 5 minutes ago. I was saying that I think he's going to be a big help, and I think for a bit we perhaps thought of him in the Busquets place, but perhaps for this start he'll play as an 8, and then he'll free up the other 8 spot for Rakitic or Arthur or whatever, and he'll really help them without the ball. I think that will be good, but I think that'd be even better if you had a manager who could just take it to the next level from a systemic kind of standpoint, and not necessarily looking at Frankie de Jong as the solution. Like my team's really poor in one of the 4 stages of the game, or one of the 4 phases of the game, so I'm going to pick up this super expensive player to fix it.
Yeah,
I don't think, like, if it's a systemic issue, I think he's going to help, because his skill set will really benefit the team. But
do you think they'll end up playing a different style of play with him? Because it does feel as though you bring in Frankie, and it does feel as though they're a little bit more like Man City than Valverde's Barcelona.
But that's just like in terms of like the players, not necessarily how they use them. I don't know. I legitimately do not know how they're going to approach things. I think it'd be really, really helpful if Zidane and Real Madrid and whomever takes control of Atletico next season, is probably not going to be Simeone. It'd be really helpful if they stepped up, and if they kind of put Barca on their toes, regardless of that forcing a coaching switch at Barca or not. It would help. The lack of internal competition really ends up costing them And yeah,
There's a question here from Janos Erdai.
you
How do
you can answer questions as well, don't you?
Oh yeah, well you have much more interesting
Do
lines
I?
of attack than I would have, I'm sure.
Someone should definitely. I'm gonna. I don't think I retweeted your post saying that we're
Yeah,
live.
go and do that. But Janis Erdai asks, how do you set up your defense with essentially a player less in Messi position, but also in the early phases?
You're gonna
So I
you're gonna
guess,
have to
and this is
repeat
something that
yourself because you're gonna have to repeat yourself because
you
you're.
just didn't listen.
No, cut off.
Oh, did I?
Yeah, and I don't think
Yeah.
I perhaps not even the people heard it.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
I'll repeat it then. Janis asks,
I promise I tried to listen. I failed at it clearly. Don't get me wrong,
It's
but
all right.
I did try.
How do you set up this is Giannis, how do you set up your defense with essentially a player less in Messi in transition, but also in early phases? This is a sort of ongoing question that has been faced when you have teams with players who are like ultimate playmakers. So with players like Neymar as well, right?
Yeah, but I don't think that's like it's obviously an issue that Messi doesn't defend, right? Or that Messi, like, it's not like Messi doesn't defend; he just doesn't defend aggressively, and he's pretty like passive or whatever you want to call it, and that's fine. The issue here is more so because Coutinho and Suarez. I don't know why I blocked there. It's because he hasn't scored a goal.
To block out Suarez, I think some people would argue that.
Yeah. Anyway, it's because Suarez and Coutinho don't do it either, and you just kind of end up not being a man down. You end up being 3 men down, especially like your front 3, and you're just screwed because your counter pressing is always screwed.
Yeah.
And your midfield ends up getting burnt every time. And it's really rare to see Coutinho and or Usman or whoever else has been playing for the wings on the wings for them, defending aggressively as like to help out the midfield. And so I ended up not thinking that Messi is not necessarily the issue, especially not if he's playing centrally. Like if he was playing wide, I think that'd be more of an issue. But if he's playing centrally, it ends up being somewhat okay. But if you have more than a player like that, you're screwed. Like you have at Liverpool. Liverpool's obviously pretty much the exact opposite of an example. It's the other extreme. But at Liverpool, Salah and Mane and Firmino all work their butts off. And they do it well as well. Like they don't just defend for the sake of defending; they do it intelligently. But they do it regardless of having freedom on the ball. They're pretty much free in possession, especially Mane and Salah. So, and in certain Premier League games, I don't think they track back as much as they do in the Champions League. But in the Champions League or in certain big games, like even in the Premier League, Klopp knows that has to happen, or they're completely imbalanced. So like. I think each game's a game, but like you can't enter this stage of the competition and have such a situation to be exploited, like so easily exploited. I mean that and not being like awake to a corner situation, which happened yesterday.
Which
and
is
that was awesome, by the way.
Yeah, and that was shown up to be a tactical.
I think that's one of my favorite Champions League goals.
Yeah.
What's your favorite Champions League goal?
Oh, that's a good question.
You can have more than one if you like.
Obviously the Zidane one against the German team. I've completely blanked on it, but you know the volley that he does where the ball gets clipped in.
Wasn't live.
Was it Leverkusen? Was it Leverkusen?
I think so. Wasn't alive. I don't think.
You weren't alive.
What year was that?
90. Oh, let's not get into this, Thiago. That's just
I was just curious because I've seen the goal. It's not like, don't take me as an ignorant person. I just received a really fun insult on Twitter.
We should move on to talk again. Do keep your questions coming in, but we should.
You tell me your favorite Champions League goal. The people want to know.
I talked about the Zidane one. I think that's probably my favorite. Apparently that doesn't count because it happened before you were born, and therefore.
No, it just felt like a cop-out answer. You're like, yeah, I kind of I mean, there's that Zidane goal, and then you're just like, let's move on. I'm like, okay, I guess that's one.
Okay, we can talk about favorite Champions League.
I'm just curious. I don't think I have one.
And I'm sure the guys who are listening can throw some as well into the chat. That is your favorite. What was the one before that then?
I don't know. Let me think about it.
It's a tough question to just dump on someone.
It is
without any.
It is.
I'll tell you what my favorite non-goal is. It's John Terry slipping and missing a penalty. That's a high point of Champions League history
against Man United. I think was that Stankovic goal from the halfway line in the Champions League. It was, wasn't it, for Inter?
Yeah, I guess so.
I think that was a Champions League goal. Oh no, my favorite Champions League goal has to be it reminded me because Bale away at Inter. I think that's probably up there. But yesterday's Origi goal. That's so fun. That's so fun.
Yeah, well,
it's so fun.
It's basically an argument for why you should have analysts, right? And
I mean, yeah, I guess so.
We've not really talked about Liverpool very much.
We didn't.
No, and we are going to talk about the final. We should talk about the final.
It's going to be really interesting to see who's fit and who's going to put themselves at risk more to be fit for a Champions League final.
What do you mean by that?
I mean that Grace was tweeting about this. So as soon as the final, not the final, as soon as the game ended tonight, Grace, what's her last name? I forget.
Listen, is that right?
Yeah, I think so. So Grace was tweeting that Kane is obviously going to put his career on the line to play a Champions League final. And I can definitely see that happening because it's Kane and he's been doing that for a couple of years now. Salah and Firmino are out. Who else has been out? Keita is out, but Keita is really out for the season.
Injured. Henderson took a knock yesterday and went off.
Yeah, so there's all those options. And Salah already got don't forget that Salah already played the World Cup pretty much limping because after the Champions League final injury. And he basically forced himself to play in the World Cup because it was Salah and he had to carry Egypt, whatever. And Kane does the same thing constantly for Tottenham. So it's going to be really interesting, more than just to see who plays and who's fit, or more than to see who plays. It will be fun to see who's fit because there's a chance that some completely unfit players will start in the Champions League final. So there's that. Nico, and I think Nico was the one saying that Tottenham would be the easiest team for Liverpool to beat. I think you could argue that. I think exploiting Llorente like they did today could theoretically be a good idea if Van Dijk wasn't the thing.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't feel as though they can Ajax Liverpool in quite the same way that they Ajax, right?
Yeah, it's rough because you have very few ways of getting around Liverpool.
So we know that Liverpool are going to play 4-3-3.
We do know that.
Whereas Pochettino is a little bit more tactically flexible when it comes to
what happened to Robertson yesterday. I just reminded myself because he left at half time.
Yeah, he went off because he got clipped by someone. I don't know the deal.
That's the single most important injury so far, I think, because it just changes their. It's the one that changes play style.
Yeah,
more drastically when compared to.
That's all right. They've got Alberto Moreno on the bench, mate.
I think there's a very high chance that he's going to come to Portugal.
Oh, really?
Yeah, supposedly Benfica want him. I mean, good for
them.
The papers say he has a very high wage, so that's
couldn't happen to a nicer team. But we know that Liverpool are playing 4-3-3 probably.
Yeah.
What do you think? How do you think Spurs will come out?
Depends on who's fit. Cause you gotta assume that Kane might be fit. Maybe. There's the Winks situation. Is Winks done for the season? or is he
I
a
suspect.
question mark?
As Baresi says in the chat, it's 24 days until the final, which is quite a long time to wait. It means that that gives you almost enough time for certain players to come back, and you'd think that someone like Robertson would be all right by then, unless he's picked up something worse.
So they should be fine. So they should start Miller in midfield still.
Yeah.
So they should pretty much start this theoretically like the starting 11s that they started yesterday and today.
Apart from Kane might be around, right? Or is he?
But if Kane's around, well, is he fully fit? That's the first question. If he's fully fit,
is Kane ever fully fit these days?
Sure, that's a good question. And then, like, if he's fully fit, I think there's an argument to, like, I think you'd have a lot of trouble dropping either of Lucas and Son, because Son has been pretty much Tottenham's player this season, and Lucas took Tottenham to the final. And Dele and Eriksen always play. Sissoko needs to play, and you're not going to enter a double pivot of Sissoko and Eriksen.
No.
So I really guess that one of Son or Lucas needs to leave, I guess.
Unless they play the 4-4-2 with a midfield diamond.
Yeah, but then, so you're playing just like one of 1am or Sissoko, and then
you're playing. Well, they played Eriksen like on the left side of the 3 on the left side of the 2 in the middle.
I don't think they'd enter a Champions League final with Dele and Eriksen as 8s, as the 2 weights.
I guess you'd have to drop one. Yeah, that's
with
true.
Sissoko as a single 6 for Sissoko. Sissoko had some good runs. Sissoko had some really France 2016 like runs today in the second half. Really reminded me of that glorious final.
So they're going to have to drop one of Son or Lucas, right?
Yeah, pretty much. They're pretty much.
Lucas has just scored a hat-trick, and everyone's thinking of Son as like the breakout player of this season. Well, not breakout, as in like he's been the star player this season.
Yeah, so that's
a really not a nice choice.
Yeah, so I think you could argue that Kane might start on the bench. Maybe. I don't know. It really depends on his fitness, but like kind of shoehorning him in, having to drop one of those 2 guys, and him not being totally fit is kind of meh. But at the same time, he does give you different characteristics, and Lucas and Son are arguably more similar to each other than either of them to Kane. So I think there's an argument there. But like I think starting Lucas, starting like the exact 11 that started today could be decent. Do you know what kind of injury Sanchez has? Is he done for the season?
Again, I have no idea. So,
so again, many injuries. There's
both teams have been very set in their 11s, right? And Spurs haven't signed anyone, so Spurs are bare bonesing it anyway.
But Tottenham are in constant change because they're always injured. Constantly.
Yeah, no, of course, but it does feel as though Spurs are sort of at a point now where they're likely to have quite a few players back for the final. Like, there's the chance that Kane will be back, e.g., and it feels as though the team that they fielded today was pretty much their strongest team without Kane. So I think they'll probably be feeling quite positive about their selection chances. Yeah. And Liverpool, I guess the question is like, how bad is the impact on Salah? I imagine Salah will be back by then.
Yeah, I imagine so.
Yeah,
and like if and same thing goes for Firmino.
Yeah, I don't know what's wrong with Firmino. Do you know?
Nope. No. But if one of them is out, it'll be Origi getting the spot, and not Shaqiri, I don't think.
Yeah, curious. I thought a little bit disappointing.
Yes. I'm not sure he's disappointing when you. I mean, depends on what kind of expectations you set out for him.
But when Divock Origi is coming in and scoring a brace and changing the game, like you wouldn't expect him to be that player who's doing that rather than Shaqiri.
I mean, sure, but Origi kind of just had to show up and be in the right place, and that's fine. I'm not saying he doesn't have credit. He does, but it's not like he had this outstanding game. He did really well, and he's probably gonna carry on in the lineup if the injuries continue. But like, Midfield should be the same as yesterday, I think. If Robertson is back, Milner is definitely starting the final. Keita is definitely out because he's out for the season, so it should probably be Endo.
Yeah, I mean, he was celebrating yesterday with some kind of medical sheath on his leg, so I'm suspecting he's probably not in the best way.
When he was with the Liverpool shirt, with the Liverpool kid at home, he's so sweet. But yeah, and Fabinho in midfield. So, I mean, you could question if Klopp is going to try and do what did away to Barca, but in terms of right back with Joe Gomez, but you can't drop Trent now. So that's the only real question in terms of their back lines.
Yeah, I guess so. We know that the Liverpool a lot against teams in this Champions League have done like mid presses and sort of sprung traps in the midfield area. So there's questions. Someone's asked whether or not where is it? Sorry, it's gone up a little bit. But whether or not Spurs, Shabab asks, should Tottenham play direct from the get-go, start Llorente and hoof the ball long? You've got no chance of beating Liverpool's press. I mean, we've talked about that a little bit.
You could argue that. You need you.
The problem is
if you don't start, even if you don't, yeah, exactly. But like, even if you don't force it, you kind of need to do it more often than you would do in a regular game. But like, Llorente will have to face Van Dijk. Like, although to be fair, the forward is the one who picks who he's facing per se. Like, sure. So like.
Matip's been playing well as well. It's not like it's not like
it's not like Matip is bad in the air and like Fabinho is no like complete pushover either. I mean, Llorente is really, really good up there, but like I think they should probably start like Lucas and Son from wider positions and like try to avoid the press that way, and just like when they do go going long, but like wide towards one of Lucas or Son. Instead of them playing as central as they did, or just simply like if you, and then it depends if you have Kane or not. But if you just have those two, just keeping your strikers more or less open, or at least one of them, to offer like a longer passing option, then the other one dropping closer, the attacking mid dropping closer, and what have you. But like. It's tough. You at that point you're just gonna end up trying to find spaces in behind, probably behind the fullbacks.
Giannis is asking whether they play Kane a bit wider and use him as a target man against a fullback. I guess
I mean for the same thing goes for Llorente again, but Kane wider is probably better.
I wonder if they did the same thing that they did against Real Madrid last year when they played Llorente and Kane behind him. But again, we've already talked about the selection headache that Pochettino's got because he's already.
The thing is that the difference there is that great sentence by me there, but like the thing about that is that Liverpool are a really good pressing team and they're gonna trap Tottenham's midfield, and Real Madrid were really good in midfield, but it wasn't because they pressed well. It was because they avoided being pressed really well with Modric and Kroos. So, like, your approach had to be slightly different. I don't think you can mirror it. And then you have the situation of Kane not being fit.
Yeah.
And I don't know, man. I think I'm going to call Nathan on this one and have him. I'm not, because if we get him on call, he's probably going to say stuff that can't be said to the public.
Well, we should probably start drawing this to a close. So we should maybe. What's your hunch for the final? I guess it's stupid to ask really because it can literally go either way, right? So, but who's your hunch?
Can it go either way?
It can go either way, yeah. So when it does, we shall come back on here and say, "Look at us, we got it right. It went either way."
Yeah. I'm hoping Tottenham takes it. I think it's unlikely because Liverpool is the better team with better players and the tactical advantage. But I think, but I'm going to be rooting for Tottenham to win it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think it's definitely an uphill battle. odds in favor of Liverpool.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you in the sense that I think that Liverpool, obviously the favourite team, anything can happen in the final. Liverpool have the better team, I think, on paper. And
it's just more so the approach is really, really. It's not like the approach is superior. It's just like that approach tends to be really advantageous against Tottenham. Yeah. And
we've seen it happen this season, right?
Yeah, just, like you can't beat a trap. You can't beat a midfield trap with Sissoko and Wanyama. Like you can somewhat do it with Sissoko at times because he does surpass the press at times. But like you can't do it with Wanyama. Oh, there's Dyer as well. So I guess theoretically you can play Wanyama and Dyer and just not move. I guess I don't know. Winks would have been really, really important for this matchup and just for their need of midfielders in general. I don't know what happened to him. Tottenham has too many injuries for me to give up. But yeah, it's really troublesome to beat the press with those players. I guess you could go 3 centre backs. You can bring in Foyth, even if Sanchez isn't fine. You can bring in Foyth, he's better on the ball, and hope to kind of stretch their press out that way and kind of push the likes of Trippier, who's really bad. Again, like in situations where he's pressed, you can push him further forward, and then hopefully you won't drop the ball as close to your goal. So that could be done.
Yeah.
To a certain extent, I think 3 centre backs could be the way to go, especially if Sanchez is back. Even if Sanchez doesn't start, Foyth, due to his ability on the ball, could be a decent shout. But
what would you play in front of the 3 then?
What?
How would you set up in front of the 3? In front of the 3.
In front of the 3, I'd probably be relatively comfortable just playing Sissoko and one of
just a double puppet.
And then you can. Then I'm fine with playing Sissoko, Ali, and Eriksen.
Okay.
Like the three midfielders that we were saying. I think that if you play a 3 of centre backs behind them, and then you just play the wing backs, and then Lucas and Young-Min Son.
Yeah. Okay.
I think you should. I think then that midfield might be able to hold up better. But there's Dyer as well, or there's Wanyama. If you really want to keep on playing Wanyama and he's fit enough and he's feeling better or playing better, you can use Wanyama, Sissoko, or Wanyama, Sissoko, Ali, or Eriksen, and then the other pushes forward with Son or with Lucas.
Yeah, no,
but
I agree.
I think the third centre back might end up being important. I don't know if it's enough to push them over the edge in the tactical advantage board.
If they play 3 at the back, obviously against Liverpool's front 3, are you not a little bit nervous about that? Do you not think that will immediately?
It depends on where your fullbacks are.
Yeah, I suppose.
When I say 3,
you mean 5?
I really mean 7.
Yeah.
I am a fan of Daesh. No, but
it is true. They do call you the Portuguese Sean.
They do call me that, unfortunately. Sean Dyche would do anything for my head of hair.
In Portugal, Sean Dyche would look like you, and in England, you would look like him. It's a scary reality, that, isn't it?
Yeah, I just enter England, my entirety of my hair falls over, and my beard turns red, and I get a really graspy voice.
Hello,
Sean Dyche. Oh, the lads did really well today.
Don't ever do an English accent again, please.
I will not keep on insulting your culture.
I think it's clear to say that it's quite nice to have a Champions League final where you don't really mind who wins so much. Well, I certainly don't. It's not. Yeah, it's nice having someone who isn't Real Madrid as well.
Yeah, I think like regardless, as soon as Barca went off yesterday, the Champions League final would be won by Liverpool, Tottenham, or Ajax, and all of those teams are like Liverpool hasn't won it since Istanbul. Tottenham
hasn't ever won it,
and Ajax hasn't been to a final since the Juventus final, right? Since the Juventus Ajax final.
When was that? Was that the 95 one, or was there a more recent one?
Was the 95? Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, it's been a while.
Yeah.
and I think any team I'd be like more or less fine to win it.
Yeah.
But I do want Pochettino to get a Champions League final. You know how epic that would be.
Mm.
Regardless, it's not. I'm going to be upset for Liverpool. It's going to be fun too.
Well, we should end this here.
We shall.
If you want to follow Tiago, you can follow him at Tiago Estv, ESTV, and Tiago is spelled without an H, right? No. Yeah.
Don't insult me. Don't insult me and my culture ever again.
And you can follow me at John_Mackenzie. This video will go up onto YouTube, so we will share it on our timelines if you want to rewatch it, take notes. And thank you very much for joining us on this ride.
You said take notes. Yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, and we will maybe do another one of these at some point because I quite enjoy them.
With extra people in.
Yeah.
You guys. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So thanks very much, and we will say goodbye.
The video.
Goodbye.